Give me a minute and let's respond to friend of the channel, Bertus's comment here or question. In a recent video, I suggested that I'm not doing frontline updates because there's nothing to report. The front line isn't really moving. The Russians just keep throwing meat wave after meat wave at the front line, and the Ukrainians just keep destroying them. And of course, the Ukrainians are taking losses too. There's no doubt about that. But the ratios favor Ukraine all out of proportion to what they should, frankly. So in this light, Bertus asked the question, is it a stalemate? And it is not. And there's an important distinction to make between a static front line, a deadlock, and a stalemate. A stalemate is a situation you can't recover from. By definition, a stalemate is a situation where no one can win. That's a stalemate. That is not the situation in Ukraine, not at all. In terms of, there's the front line, sure, the ground forces, right? And that's deadlocked right now. Despite the fact that Russia has every advantage. They have air superiority, they have glide bombs coming in every day, destroying Ukrainian frontline positions. They've got a 7 or 6, depending on who you talk to, artillery advantage. So for every one artillery shell that the Ukrainians can fire, the Russians are firing 6 or 7. Huge. Tank advantage, artillery advantage, manpower advantage. All of that belongs to Russia, and yet the front line barely budges. We were talking about a 300-meter advance around Tornetki. 300 meters after a month and hundreds of lives and dozens of armored vehicles. It's not movement. It's not advance. It's a creeping crawl. I mean, at that rate, it's going to take the Russians about 290 years to get to Kyiv. And nobody can do that, right? So what's the difference? If a stalemate means nobody can win, what's a deadlock? A deadlock is a case where the balance of force is such that no one can make any real strategic or tactical advance. You're locked in this situation until something changes. Now, the Czech initiative to get shells to the Ukrainians has promised to deliver the first batch sometime this month in April. That's going to change the artillery advantage. That's going to level the playing field on artillery. What effect is that going to have? Then if we go 60 days out, we should see the F-16s arrive. What effect is that going to have? We see increasingly the Ukrainians deploying new technologies on the front line. Ground drones, infantry drones. What effect is that going to have? The Russians are, I don't want to say innovating, because we don't see the kind of innovation coming from the Russians that we see from the Ukrainians, but the Russians are learning. And the Russians have adapted 2 new kinds of weapons, 2 new bombs. They've adapted glide bombs so that they now have 3 times the range that they used to have. That's meaningful. That's an advance for the Russians. And they've introduced a new thermobaric bomb, the ODAB 1500. And we saw its first use in Sumy. And this is a thermobaric bomb. It releases an aerosol spray into the air 30 meters before the target, and then it sets the air on fire. It's an awful, horrible weapon that we saw do terrible damage in the town of Velka Pivsarika this past weekend. So the Russians are advancing their technology on the one thing they know how to do, blow everything the fuck up. While the Ukrainians are advancing their technologies in a variety of innovative ways that are literally changing the face of modern warfare before our very eyes. So, Bertus, my friend, I would not use the word stalemate. I would say that the ground forces are deadlocked at this time, and that a technological advantage on one side or the other is required to break that deadlock. And I believe that those are coming. And then in terms of the deep battle, Ukraine has that all sewn up. We see it in the Russian Navy hiding in Novosibirsk. We see it in Russian pilots panicking and dropping their loads over Russia rather than come too close to the front line or risk being blown up by their own air defense. We see it in the constant strikes on materials plants and manufacturing and refining facilities deep inside of Russia. We see it in the fear from Vladimir Putin with his constant nuclear saber rattling. The Russians are afraid, and well they should be, because the righteous wrath of the Ukrainian people is a terrible beauty to see.